All right,
Hey.
guys. So
Oh,
I'm
sorry, Mr.
telling you
Breen.
right now, no, like before we even do the intro, you got to understand that the Cold War is encapsulated in the movie Predator. And I really think that that's the focus today is how Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, rising from the ashes, chased through the South American jungles, fighting against communist rebels. You've got the same actor who played Apollo Creed. We talked about that in our last episode. He's in Predator, so you know it's a Cold War movie. And what happens? He gets killed. But Dutch, that's Arnold Schwarzenegger? Schwarzenegger? I don't know. I'm not German. Austrian. Sorry. But he represents like the purity of America. And, maybe I'm just making all this up. Maybe I've just been in my house for 3 weeks now and overthinking everything. But Predator is the Cold War. It's all of it. It's the post-Cold War. And then how does that movie end? Predator nukes everything because he's a commie. Predator's a communist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Storytime with the Historists with your host, Jen Dumas, Matt Breen. And once again, we are joined today by Mr. Patrick Hammond. Mr. Hammond, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, comrades.
I was gonna say, I'm glad you said something. You were waving. I was like, this is a podcast.
Yeah. Well,
This is way
there's two audiences. There's you and them.
That's right.
So Mr. Breen has been on this Predator kick for a couple days now, so I'm super excited to see where this one goes as not even a euphemism, but as a metaphor for the Cold War or the last, aspects of the Cold War in the 80s and 90s. So Mr. Breen, start us off.
Proxy war. It's like a proxy war. Mr. Hammond, last time we were together, you brought up this whole idea of proxy wars, and the United States can't take on the Soviet Union. But I think in some ways, you had Rocky, and that's America coming back from all the bad stuff, and then Rocky actually beats Drago, and he wins. Or is it Drago?
Yeah, it's Drago.
I couldn't remember. Yeah. Maybe it was like a Game of Thrones mashup there in my mind. But anyway, I think Predator in some way represents communism. Predator in some way represents this clash. And then so you've got the CIA down in Latin America, like doing these like destabilizations off the books, black like ops sort of thing. And then you've got like, Schwarzenegger being this metaphor for American purity and goodness, and he's got to take on face-to-face Predator. And it looks like for so long, just like in the Cold War, that Predator is stronger. But what does Schwarzenegger do? He uses his mind. He's not just the muscles from Brussels, baby. He uses his mind, and he overcomes Predator. Predator ends up imploding, right? He nukes himself, just like we saw in the last episode, Mr. Hammond, you were talking about Gorbachev bringing down from the inside because of his reforms. He wasn't trying to do it, but because of the reforms in Chernobyl and some of these things, just like Predator gets brought down from the inside because he thinks he's better and stronger and more capable than Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger wins. They get to the chopper, they get away, and Predator goes up in this ball of fire, this nuke, mushroom cloud explosion. And who's left? It's Schwarzenegger.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You got the CIA trained soldiers in the jungles of South America somewhere, and they're fighting other South American, I don't know, drug dealers or whatever else, or anti-US people. I don't know.
It's like Contra rebels or
Sandinistas.
Sandinistas.
And at this very same moment, this alien from another planet hits Earth. And now Arnold and his military buddies are going to have a bigger issue to deal with, not just the Sandinistas or the Contras. Now they've got to deal with this Predator. And you're saying that Arnold Schwarzenegger's character Dutch represents the US and democracy, and the Predator represents the Soviet Union and communism.
That's right.
Well, what's the bigger threat? These little soldiers, or this big idea, this alien presence, this ideology that lands on Earth and threatens everything?
Seeing it from my perspective.
Yeah.
That crying in the background. Sorry about that, guys. That was my 2-year-old daughter who just totally. I didn't hit spoiler alert, and now she's crying about it because now she's never going to enjoy Predator. At 2 years old.
Was she really crying about the spoiler alert?
It was either that or Animal Crackers. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's one of the two.
Okay, so let's talk about this, because I know at the beginning of the film, or when they first see the Predator, this thing comes out of nowhere and it's super awesome and super technologically advanced, which the Soviet Union was not, by the way, but still. and it's just taking people out left and right because it's invisible. Oh my God, invisible! Like the invisible red threat in the United States. Damn.
I'm telling you, this is deep. This is deep. This is deep stuff. And I think what that leaves us with when it's all said and done and Schwarzenegger's the last one and he's flying away, that's like the United States moving into the 1990s and that what George Herbert Walker Bush termed the end of history, right? This is like kind of that jab at Marxism. And what's left is this world that you think is safer, but just like in Predator, it's not safer because there's going to be another one and another one. There's these new threats. There's this new scariness. And I think one of the things that you left off, Mr. Hammond, in our last podcast that I'm really intrigued with was the idea that the world was a scarier place, right? So what do you mean by that?
Well, there were two different theses about what the world's going to look like after the Cold War ended, after the fall of the Soviet Union. And there was the end of history, this idea that, hey, there's no more communism, and now these liberal type democracies are going to flourish around the world, and we're going to get along together. The other thesis was Samuel Huntington, who said that no, there's going to be a clash of civilizations in this post-Cold War period where it's no longer going to be about this political ideology. It's going to be about religious ideologies and cultural ideologies that are going to frame dissent in this post-Cold World format. Yeah. And what has happened is we've kind of seen that second scenario roll out, and where we're not fighting communism, we're fighting people in very different ideologies, and we have this new terrorism that is really bolstered, and we're fighting people that we're reigniting this racial lens too when we find ourselves in opposition to other people. We're seeing the Chinese civilization as our next possible major adversary in world affairs. And the other terror that I think you're talking about too is, well, what happens to all these nuclear weapons that are all over the place?
Yeah.
Like in Predator, right? Okay, there's the nuke, and there goes the United States. It's also like
that's right.
Like leading, like, oh, we were there, but we're leaving, and you guys have to clean up after this. Sorry, guys. And
that's totally true. I didn't even think of that part of it.
Yep.
That's totally true. Yeah. And it's, go ahead, Jen.
Well, I was just thinking, I'm trying to go on the movie analogy still, is like when we had just, Predator, Schwarzenegger versus the Predator, United States versus Soviet Union, but you see a few years later on, which to me is just the most horrible thing ever, because I'm a huge fan of Alien. You've got Alien and Predator now, okay, versus the humans, right? And so now Predator could still represent, now that it's Russia, maybe the Alien represents China or like terrorism that we see. And
they're underneath Antarctica too, is unseen threats.
Yes,
it's again that idea of invisible threats, things that you didn't know were there that are totally cropping up. And I think that that is in a way, because Patrick, you brought up Huntington's book, and Clash of Civilizations was one of the go-to texts at the end of the 20th century for neocon thought and the idea of engagement in the world. The United States is world police, and we got to be looking around every corner for a threat. And this is why we're going to be in Iraq. This is why we got to go take on Afghanistan. This is why we got to find ourselves even in the Clinton administration inside of the United States in Yugoslavia, taking on some of these big threats, right up to the last couple of years, United States engagement in Africa, United States engagement in Southeast Asia again, and re-engaging in the Philippines. These unseen threats where it's the United States taking on not a political entity, but something else, an alien, as opposed to a predator.
Well, and I think the reason that we see all this, and Patrick, you can definitely add a little bit more to this, is when we were engaging in these proxy wars, and we'll take it from a United States perspective, we were supporting all kinds of different groups across the globe as long as they were anti-communist. We didn't care if they were fascist, we didn't care if they were dictators, as long as you were anti-communist, and we would back them within the proxy wars. Well, when the Cold War ends, you still have these groups who we supported, right? And they have the weapons and the training that we've given them. And now all of a sudden these groups decide that they are going to play a bigger role in, the global theater. And and use those weapons and use the technologies that we gave them or the Soviet Union gave to their proxies, and to create this new alien destabilized world. Like Patrick, the example I'm thinking about is the Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Yeah, yeah,
So
and so yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the kind of the pattern is the United States is helping these countries to fight communism, and then once the Cold War ends, the helicopter flies away like in Predator,
mhm,
and these people are left with the training and resources meant to fight against the Soviet Union, and now they have to make a decision. Well, are we more like the United States, or do we have our own, let's say, sense of nationalism or
mhm,
sense of self that we want to have more self-determination and not rely on the United States? The United States was, let's be frank, was helping us to fight communism. They didn't care about us so
That's
correct.
right.
much.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. I mean,
helicopter's gone.
yeah.
Mhm,
I mean, and I think the Mujahideen is such a great example as well, because the CIA in the 1990s goes back into Afghanistan and they're looking to buy back those Stinger missiles, and they're looking
yeah.
to buy back those weapon systems. And the United States was paying cash. And so you have a guy like an Osama bin Laden who comes out of Saudi Arabia to go to Afghanistan to fight in that lesser jihad against the Soviets. He starts to form up his own army. And a lot of those armies that fought against the Soviets in Afghanistan were these private
Mhm,
warlord type armies. And a lot of the money that ends up funneling itself into the Al Qaeda network and being used
mhm,
to attack U.S. embassies in Africa, or the USS
mhm,
Cole, or the first World Trade Center attack,
mhm.
not just the second one that brought the towers down. A lot of that money actually came right out of the CIA payroll,
Yeah,
right out of those dark funds.
and I think
Um,
I think part of the reason for that as well is where you do see groups being more anti-US is when the Cold War ended, the US basically washed their hands of all these groups and said, okay, we don't need you anymore, we're done. Yet these regions were still destabilized because of the proxy wars. They had been destroyed, and they were looking at the United States to help them because they'd been allies with the United States during the Cold War, and the US is like, nope, we're done, figure it out on your own. That's going to piss people off.
and a history and a
Yeah,
history.
yeah.
We're done with
Yeah.
this. We're going to come back. And very famously in the 1990s, the United States, outside of that early engagement in Kuwait against
Mhm,
Iraq for the oil fields, the United States is really pretty hands off and doesn't
mhm,
want to get involved. And some of that is that Vietnam syndrome. And Patrick, you talked about that idea of the United
mhm,
States feeling good about itself after
Yeah.
being horribly bloodied in Vietnam in that proxy war. But there's also the effect of when you get into some of these Cold War battlefields like Somalia in
mhm,
1993, 94, where you get the famous Black Hawk Down incident,
mhm,
where U.S. Special Forces find themselves fighting against warlords who basically had been armed by the Soviet Union. And a lot of those guys had, very famously, Somalia didn't have a lot of food, but it had a lot of bullets. I think there was something like, 500 bullets per every person in Mogadishu.
mhm.
Right. And so you have these really unstable areas around the world, and the Soviet Union's gone, imploded. The United States has flown away, it's gone, and who's left? It's going to be somebody's got to fill that vacuum, and it creates this area where you don't have this like overbearing, pressing down threat of nuclear annihilation that we talked about in the last episode. What you have are these regional hotspots, these
Mhm.
flare-ups that it seems like world governments increasingly through the end of the 1990s and into the 2000s, even a post 9/11 world, want to keep those problems in those regions. Let's stay out of those regions as much as we can, and let's keep all this conflict regionalized so it doesn't make its way into our society. And we saw that fail pretty miserably. And, terrorist attacks
Right.
in Madrid in 2004, the huge shootouts and terrorist attacks in 2015,
Mhm.
2014 in Brussels and in Paris. I mean, it's been really, really difficult for governments all over the world to kind of contain these threats.
Yeah,
It has become unsafe.
it has, and I liked, and Patrick, if you can add to this as well, I like what you talked about. In the early 1990s, the United States does try to put out a bunch of regional fires. They really do. They tried it in Kosovo with the UN. They tried it in Mogadishu, and in all these different regions, it just blows up in the Americans' faces. Mogadishu was a nightmare. You had dead American soldiers' bodies being dragged down the streets on national TV. Kosovo and oh good God, that was an epic level nightmare where we actually probably made the situation worse because we didn't have a solid plan for going in. And so after the early 1990s, we're like, we're not going to do it. Like we tried to go in, we tried to help, it doesn't work, we're done. And then you're right, we do back off a little bit. And Patrick, can you go a little bit more into why that eventually is going to actually bite us more in the butt than it does help us?
Yeah, and I want to say I think that your analysis is absolutely correct. I was looking at United States spending for military budgets, and you would think like right after Cold War ends, where is military spending going to go? Is it going to go up or down, right?
Right,
And it's going to go down. We're no longer fighting
right,
this huge predator, this big menace, and so
right.
military spending does go down. And then all of a sudden, some huge event happens that
Mm-hmm,
nips us in the butt in 2001, where we
mm-hmm,
have the World Trade Center bombing by this terrorist group,
mm-hmm,
and all of a sudden, um, the military spending starts being spent at levels that go that exceed
yeah,
Cold War spending levels.
yeah.
To be frank with you, and so the United States tried to do this hands-off thing to a certain degree, and turns out that United States kind of readopted this role as being
Mm-hmm,
the policeman after 9/11
mm-hmm,
attacks. And yeah, just as Mr. Borain said, it's like these Al Qaeda, they had access to American weapons, American training, and all that stuff. And now that the United States was no longer being as active in the Middle East,
mm-hmm,
they felt like we're different. We now view the United States not as allies, but as an enemy,
mm-hmm.
and we're going to bring some sort of warfare to United States shores.
And a big reason for that, again, and that gets back into you bringing in Huntington and Clash of Civilizations, was the idea that instead of having a bipolar world where you had a global hegemonic power,
Mm-hmm.
where you have one country that dominates the entire planet, now you're going to have more regional hegemons. And so it was, let's try to empower. First, I mean, very ironically, in the 1980s, it's Iraq. The United
Yeah.
States, goes in and tries to empower Iraq because they had lost Iran, and Iran was a regional hegemon. And then how do you counter if Iraq's an enemy and Iran's an enemy? Then it's going to be Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start looking down into South America. Is it going to be Brazil? Is it going to be Argentina or Chile? And then we find ourselves in these really awkward situations with people like Pinochet,
Mm-hmm.
where we're like, yeah, well, if this was a regime that was not backed by the United States, we would say these guys are committing crimes against humanity. They're committing potentially genocide. And instead, we're backing them up because we need a regional hegemon there. And then when the United States leaves, the hope is these regional hegemons can dominate that area of the globe, protect everybody,
Mm-hmm.
so that bad things aren't going to happen. And that, again, that's an epic level failure. That disengagement policy that you talked about, Patrick, of hey, we're going to wash our hands of all this, directly leads to 9/11. And each one of those trip points along the way was like, oh yeah, no, that somebody else will figure this out, somebody else will take care of this, and it never happens.
Well, yeah, you look
And
at.
also,
Oh, go ahead,
I'm
Patrick.
sorry, Jed, but also the misguidedness of the idea that over time that these other civilizations are going to adopt liberal democracies in the same way the United States has, as just a natural outcome of us winning the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And culturally and historically, as you know, as a historian, I'm talking to you listeners, is that you know that a lot of areas in the world just do not operate on those ways.
Mm-mm. And you look, and I was thinking about it, like the problems that we have today, because we have problems. I mean, we have problems in Africa, we have problems in the Middle East, we have problems in East Asia, and like I was thinking about Africa is as a result of Black Hawk Down, we don't get involved in Rwanda, and
Right.
then as a result of that, it leads to problems in Uganda, in Tanzania, and the DRC, and the DRC is a hotbed right now, and so that may have been a direct result of us backing out of Africa and not giving the support that maybe some of these places need. You see it also, I mean, you see it a little bit in the Middle East. I mean, a lot in the Middle East, right? We supported, we had supported Iran, and the Ayatollah comes to power. Now we support Iraq, and then we're not supporting Iraq, we're supporting Saudi Arabia. And so it's just no one group has gotten the military or economic support to become that regional power that the United States wanted. And this is happening all over the globe. And that's why we have situations like Kim Jong-un in North Korea, and we've got situations where we have military dictators still holding on to power in Latin America. And like you said, we've created these pockets, and now that these pockets are getting more and more access to higher level technology, whether it's nuclear weapons or not, they can't be controlled. And
Oh,
that is the fear we have in the 21st century.
right. And combine that with that Vietnam syndrome
Mm-hmm.
that still exists, that many people thought, like, after, Top Gun, all that Vietnam syndrome's gone. What, that bad taste of losing the Vietnam War is out of our mouths, and we won in Iraq. But, think about 2003, we go into Iraq a second time. That turns out to be way bloodier and more
Mm-hmm.
confrontational than anybody had cared to really imagine it. Any sober-minded politician, there were people like Colin Powell who were like, no, don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
But he's overruled inside of the Bush administration. And what this has led to is this, like you said, Jen, this, we don't want to engage. We want to keep our hands off.
Mm-hmm.
You have, Sudan. You were talking about some of
Oh.
the issues that happened in sub-Saharan Africa, but
Mm-hmm.
Sudan and the genocide that takes
Mm-hmm.
place with the Interahamwe attacking South Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's largely, being ramped up in 2004, 2005. The United States is focused on Iraq. We're not looking to engage
Mm-hmm.
somewhere else in the world. And unfortunately, Syria, Yemen, because we
Yep.
want to back Saudi Arabia. Then you've got
Yep.
the Yemeni crisis. And this isn't just a Republican or Democrat issue. This is
No.
an American political issue
Right.
where, we don't want to get our hands dirty anymore in a lot of ways. And I think the manifestation of the disengagement of the 2016 election, where you have both major candidates inside of the United States saying, we vow ourselves to be disengaged,
Yeah.
right? This idea that we're going to put American workers first, we're going to put American lives first, we're not going to find ourselves as the world police anymore, really turns a blind eye, though, to the lack of stability created throughout the course of the Cold War and trying to score that knockout punch that we talked about so extensively in the last episode.
So Patrick, where does that leave us in the 21st century with all these hotspots around the world? Are we a more secure world now? Yes or no, and why?
I think we are far less secure than, as terrifying as the Cold War period was. There was that mutually assured destruction mentality that says if we decide that we're going to go to war, we're going to destroy everything.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true anymore. And Jen, you also brought up this idea of this access to technology that these hegemons are now having access to. And so we've seen escalation of countries actually becoming members of the nuclear club. It's not that we have rogue nuclear weapons all over the place. Now countries are able to develop nuclear technology on their own. And they look at places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, the United States was pretty easily able to go into those countries and invade them. What's the best way to secure your own borders? Have a nuclear weapon on hand.
Right.
And because the United States hasn't invaded a nation with a nuclear weapon, and I don't think any other country has either. And and so this brings up this new aspect of what it means to be a nation and what it means to have full, like independence from the world. And that is maybe, we have nuclear weapons as being the one major thing that sets you apart. The scariest thing for me right now is that both India and Pakistan are both members of the nuclear club. And if you know your history, boy, those two civilizations, they do not get along with each other.
No, and it's funny because like people have focused a lot on North Korea, and I agree with you that Kim Jong Un's reason for nuclear weapons is he just wants to be left alone, and he knows if he has one, then the United States is going to be less likely to invade because he does have the fear of the invasion and uniting both Koreas. And I never got the sense that Kim Jong Un was really stupid enough to launch a nuclear weapon, knowing that it was a zero-sum game for him. But I agree with you with the India and Pakistan. I mean, there is so much hatred and mistrust between those two. Is it just going to take one completely irrational leader, or a leader who would be rational but have an irrational moment, and one launches one at the other, and that's just going to have this catastrophic cascading effect?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a sobering reality to think of that, like, as scary and as like horrible as the Cold War could have been, and as bad as things almost got in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and as close as we came to doomsday, there was an equilibrium there. and that's gone in a lot of ways. And what we're left with is this uncertainty, like feeling almost helpless. And I think to close it all out, Hollywood has delivered that as well. The Last Predators movie creates humanity at this crisis point where you've got these super predators and these lesser predators and these predator dogs and all these weird predator creations, and the human beings are really just side stories in that movie. It's all the other threats that are out there and trying to cope with these threats as they come at you in rapid succession and trying to figure out who's your friend and who's your foe. And that's kind of where we're at anymore, where the first Predator was all about Dutch and Schwarzenegger and American heroics, and the last iteration of this epic film series, The Predator, is like, oh yeah, there's some humans here, but really let's just check out all these crazy threats, all these crazy predators. And that kind of coincides a lot with where the United States kind of finds itself, which is no longer a hegemonic power, but really kind of in a reactionary mode in a lot of ways. It's the world is definitely worse off for it. So I think that kind of closes us out for the Cold War. At least our podcast. I think we're going to be living with the ramifications of this thing for a long time.
I totally agree. I didn't know there were predator dogs. I don't think I've seen that one. There's predator dogs?
They're kind of like dogs. They're like turtles or fast turtles or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Predator pets.
Predator pets.
Yeah. Predators.
Predators. There you go. Well, thanks everybody for listening to us again today. This is Storytime with the Historists. Thank you, Matt and Patrick, for our delightful pop culture association with the Cold War. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
All right, guys. See you later. Thank you.
And thanks again for having me.
All right.